And now to the last question. Why is it that our emotional mind, our emotions are controlling our thinking? You ask yourself every time you are challenged with two decisions. One is a rational decision, the other one is an emotional decision. Most of the time you go for the emotional one, right? There is a scientific explanation behind that. So let me explain this, right? And therefore, I have to explain this. Bear with me if you are not a person who likes to follow science, but I will use science as the explanation because this is really what's going on in the brain. You see, when we speak of the mind does not exist. It is the activity of the brain. All these neural networks going on that create this consciousness that we become aware of the environment. So all these are activity of the brain. Now that the brain has something to do with this. So let's take a look. The brain evolved over millions of years into three main layers. The oldest is the brain stem. This is what we call survival brain. And this is where the nerves are coming in from our sense organs being brought into the brain to be processed. And therefore, this produces the notion of vijnana, or the awareness of objects that are seen, heard, smelled, taste, or touch, sensory perception, the first part of the mind. The second part of the mind is this second middle layer of the brain, which is the limbic system, commonly referred to as the emotional brain. This is what we call the affective process, citta, or the layman's word is emotion. Right? And then, of course, the outermost layer is the thinking brain. This leads to the cognitive process. Therefore, we are able to think wise or think intelligently. We have intellect, and this is the mano. Okay, so these are the three parts of experiences that are produced by the activity of the brain and the body. Actually, it's not just only the brain, but the whole body is involved with this. But we are using the brain as the focal point to explain this. So limbic system is this emotional brain. We have to be aware of this. Deep inside the emotional brain, there is a structure called the amygdala. This is very important because the amygdala is the one that senses everything that is going on. Every sense organ picks up some signals, sends it to the brain. It passes through the amygdala first. So the amygdala is the first thing that examines every sensation that is experienced. And therefore, it scans every sensation, sensory perceptions. And it begins to look for threats and dangers and react to it. When the amygdala reacts to it, it produces, it creates a process called fight or flight reaction. This is commonly called stress. And this begins by releasing stress hormones, causing the body to change. All this is to protect the body from harm. The amygdala's purpose is to protect the organism from harm. But unfortunately, the amygdala can be aroused unnecessarily, arousing emotions of fear, panic, anger, and all kinds of negative emotions being aroused. Therefore, the amygdala has a dual role. It can also become a terrorist in your brain. When the amygdala is unnecessarily aroused, it behaves like a terrorist in the brain. It is both your bodyguard and your terrorist, protecting your body from harm, but at the same time disturbing your mind. Okay, but we have outer brain, the learning brain, the cerebral cortex, made of 4 lobes, and it is this frontal lobe that is most important for all these functions here: attention system, long-term memory, logic, critical thinking, and so on. But it is the last 2 lines: decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, rationalizing, all done by that little part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. That little part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex is right behind your eyebrow, actually. And this is responsible for your happiness. If you make good decisions, it will lead to happiness. If you set positive goals, motivating goals, or productive goals, it leads to your happiness. If you're able to plan your actions properly and implement them, it leads to your happiness. If you're able to judge right from wrong, good from bad, it leads to your happiness. If you're able to reason out causes and conditions, doing A leads to B, doing C leads to D, causes and conditions, you realize that, and then you will avoid things that lead to unhappy outcome, and you do only things that lead to happy outcome. It leads to your happiness. Rationalizing, the ability to rationalize your resources. Don't overwork yourself. Learn how to relax at the right time. Learn how to focus and concentrate at another time. It leads to your happiness. Otherwise, you become too stressed, right? So these are the important things that lead to your happiness in the prefrontal cortex. Now, let's take a look at why the emotional brain takes control. Now, first, I want to explain this term, cognitive dissonance, a very common psychological term that refers to the mind being torn between two major decisions. So to keep it simple, I will just refer to being torn between emotions and thinking and reasoning. So feeling and reasoning, pulling in opposite direction. There's a Pali word for this called vicikiccha. Unfortunately, the term vicikiccha is translated as skeptical doubt. So it's pulling in opposite direction, causing perplexity, causing indecisiveness, causing stress and distress. Stress is the body changes. Distress is the mind getting disturbed, causing confusion, causing mind in turmoil, and that leads to doubt. So vicikiccha is not really doubt. It is all these pulling in opposite direction, perplexity, and so on, right? So what you have happening is feeling on one side, right? When you experience something, you have an emotional feeling towards it. But at the same time, you think through it, reasoning on the other side, pulling in the opposite direction. And because of that pulling, you can't decide. But most of the time, the feeling part will win. So there is this tug of war going on, but the feeling part will win. So let me show you what the scientists are saying about this.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off. It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is, if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions. This is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has superhighways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
So the scientists were saying that the way the thinking brain has evolved, it is evolved to do fancy things, not to control the emotions. And he mentioned very clearly, the emotional brain in the amygdala, the core of this emotional reaction, has very strong connections to the thinking brain. So when the amygdala is aroused, it sends very strong, powerful signals to the thinking brain, disturbing the thinking brain. All kinds of emotional thoughts will sabotage, will affect the thinking brain. At the same time, the thinking brain does not have strong connections going back to the emotional brain. Therefore, the thinking brain is not able, under normal circumstances, to control the emotions. We need to train our mind to think in such a way that we're able to take control of our emotions. That I will leave it to the next sharing because there won't be enough time to talk about that. So when we talk about cognitive dissonance, what is happening is feelings and reasoning pulling in opposite direction. It leads us to experience cognitive dissonance, vichikiccha. But because of the emotional brain having strong connections to the thinking brain, sabotaging the thinking brain, we tend to decide according to the emotional feelings. So our decisions is centered around emotionally charged decisions. Now, human beings are very smart. Because we make decisions using our emotions, but we still have the ability to think, we use our thinking to create explanations and clever reasoning, excuses to justify why we are reacting in an emotional way. We're very good at that. We're always justifying our emotional reaction. That's why this justification. So therefore, what is happening is we use our emotional brain to make decisions, and we use our thinking brain to defend our emotional decisions. That's what we do. It's called justification. Now, Bhante Punaj has explained about this. First thing is the way to solve this problem, and all this is Buddhist psychotherapy. The way to solve this problem on a short-term basis is changing the interpretations that arouse emotions. So by changing interpretations of something fearful or something threatening to interpretations of something that leads to peace and comfort, we can control the emotions. But this is only a short-term solution. The long-term solution that the Buddha talks about, I explained that. So this short-term solution is really calming the emotion, calming the affective process. The long-term solution that the Buddha offered is that we have to learn to really eradicate this self-centered emotions, right? Completely stop the self-centered emotions through meditation training and so on, right? So this is absolutely stopping the emotional process that is going on. So now let's listen to the last part. Okay, we're almost time. So the last part, a video where Bhante is explaining about this Buddhist psychotherapy, getting rid of emotions.
One message goes to the amygdala and the emotion is aroused, and the other message goes to the brain where the thinking goes on, and then you begin to change the way. And now they are talking about this, so it's very important to understand that the Buddha has gone even beyond this end. If we see the first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is mano pubbangama dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There mano means that thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called citta. Mano pubbangama means the thinking part comes first before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha use this method. And that is what we are using in this book. If you read this book, here the Buddha is, I am talking about this, that what is called the 7 steps to awakening, Sapta Bojjhanga. The Sapta Bojjhanga is really using that same principle, and that is how the emotions are completely eliminated. And that elimination of the emotion, this is not understood by all the modern meditators who talk about vipassana, bhavana and all that. They are unaware of this. This is why this message that I am talking about is a very important message, that this has to be conveyed to the world. And that is how our friend is now prepared to do these things, that we will be able to somehow convey this message to the world, that the Buddha, how he eliminated all emotions, lobha, dosa and moha, lust, hate and delusion, completely eradicated. He was able to do this because of this Sapta Bojjhanga, based on the principle that you get in the first verse in the Dhammapada. And that is very important to understand this, and that is how we are able to get rid of these emotions completely. And so you can learn this meditation and begin to ultimately somehow reach some stage, even if you can't reach that stage in this life, even in a future life you might be able to. The important thing is to learn this properly and practice it.
So Bhante was telling us to learn this properly and practice it. When he said Satta Bojjhanga, he was actually referring to the last part. This is the higher teachings of the Buddha, where that meditation based on Satta Bojjhanga will lead to developing true insights into realities. And this is what other people call vipassana, but they don't follow Satta Bojjhanga. That's why Bhante was actually mentioning that people don't seem to follow Satta Bojjhanga. Satta Bojjhanga is the teaching of the Buddha that helps us develop this wisdom, this insight, right, called panya.